Okay, here's another great exercise for you to practice many of the concepts we have covered in this section. You can find the PDF below this video, but let's go over that together real quick. So in this exercise, you will design and implement a user registration service that allows users to register by providing their name, email, and password. The system will save the user in a repository and simulate sending a notification to the user after registration. The mail server settings, such as host and port, for sending notifications should be configurable via the application properties file. Well, in this case, application YAML. This is a simulation and no actual emails will be sent. Now, just like the previous exercise, here we have a class diagram. We have two interfaces. One is the user repository, which is a wrapper around a database. Let me zoom in a little bit more. In this interface, we have a method for saving a user. Potentially in the future, we can have methods for finding users, deleting them, and so on. Now, for this exercise, we need a single implementation of this interface in a class called in-memory user repository. On the other hand, we have another interface called notification service with a send method that takes two arguments, a message, which is a string, and recipient email, which is also a string. And for simplicity, we need a single implementation of this interface in a class called email notification service. Now, on the top, we have this user service class that is dependent on these two interfaces. Here we have a method for registering a user. So once we call this method and pass a user object, our service is going to ask the repository to save the user, and then it will ask the notification service to send a message to the user. Now, on the second page, you can find step-by-step instructions. Just follow these, spend about 20 minutes on this. This is a little bit more challenging than the previous exercise. Once you're done, come back and see my solution. Okay, let me walk you through what I have done. And by the way, just like all the lessons in the course, you can find the exact code I have written in this lesson in the Git repository that I gave you at the beginning of the course, okay? So I started by creating this user class with 4 fields. I gave it a constructor to initialize a user object. And then I added a bunch of standard getters and setters. Next, I created this user repository interface. Here we have 2 methods, save and find by email. This is used for detecting duplicate users. You will see that in a minute. Next, I implemented this interface in a class called in-memory user repository. I annotated this with the repository annotation. In this class, we have a field of type map, of string, and user. And this is an instance of the HashMap class. If you're not familiar with this concept, you need to go and watch the 3rd part of my Java course. Here's our implementation of this repository. In the save method, we have a print statement, and then we store this user in our HashMap. Find by email is pretty straightforward. Here we call users.get or default method. We provide the email, and if there is no user or no object by this email, we return null as the default value. Okay. Next, I changed our notification service interface. We created this earlier in the section, but we didn't have the second parameter, which is the recipient email. Next, I changed the email notification service. I added 2 fields here, host and port, and used the value annotation to inject these application properties into these fields. So in our application YAML file, I added new key, mail, with 2 subkeys, host and port. The values don't really matter. This is just for demonstration. Now back to the email notification service. I just made a small change here, and in the send method, I added a few more print statements. And then finally, in the store application class, I made a small change. Here we get a user service object and call the register user method twice with the exact same user object, so we can see what happens when there is a duplicate. Now, finally, let's look at our user service class. This is new. I annotated this with the service annotation. Here we have 2 fields, user repository and notification service. They're both initialized from a constructor. Here we have the register user method that takes a user object. First, we ask the repository, hey, do you have a user by this email? If this user exists, then we throw a new illegal argument exception and say user with email, whatever, already exists. Otherwise, we ask the repository to save the user and then send the user a notification. Here's the message, you registered successfully, and here's the email. Now, if we run this application, here's what we get. So initially we tried to save the user. This is the string representation of a user object because we don't have the toString method. Next, we can see details about the notification. We have the email, the message, as well as the mail server host and port. Right after that, we have an exception because we tried to register the same user twice.